Welcome back, Tiger fans, to Rockin' Radio's football podcast. I'm Nate Edwards. That's Nathan Hurst, and this is Before the Box Score. Congratulations to the Missouri basketball team. The men's basketball team, by the way, excellent showing last night. We are recording on a Thursday because Hurst wanted to watch the game. And I'm feeling like you feel like you made the right choice.
I
right?
regret nothing by that decision.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. I will admit I was quite exhausted by the end of that game, and I just sat on my couch the whole time. So
There you go.
yeah, it was definitely worth pushing this back a day, even though we have so much breaking news to talk about in February in college football.
Literally set the arena on fire. Congratulations, boys. Maybe we'll see what happens. Shades of 2012 without the finish. That would be nice. But I am not the basketball guy, and that's not why you're here to listen. You're here to listen to football. We'll leave the basketball to the guys who actually know what the hell they're talking about. So we're going to go through, the lengthy news report and update for the Missouri football team, which, as you can imagine, is just spring sessions, just training, lifting heavy things, running far distances. That's all they're doing. Now, it is hell. Those spring practices, those winter practices right after the sport is done, every player will tell you they're the worst. They're the absolute worst. And if you can hear or try to do what these guys are doing at your age, however old you are, nightmarish. But this is where you start the culture building, the bonding, the program building. Like this is where you do it. You forge them through the fires of hell of what the strength training staff can do. So kudos to the Missouri football team. You are working in the shadows and silence while the basketball team rocks and rolls. I see you. I appreciate what you're doing. You're building towards the future, which is nice. So let's knock off just one news item. And I'm not saying I broke it, but I'm saying I'm the first one who I saw talk about it. Late last night or a couple nights ago, as I was just busily refreshing the Missouri roster online, as one does, I noticed a little thing that Whit Hafer, who used to be a tight end, is now listed as an offensive lineman. And oh, by the way, he put on 19 pounds from his reported weight of in-season to his reported weight of the spring practice session. Now, he is still wearing the number 85, which is rad as hell. But currently, he's training with the offensive line, and he's a big boy. He can do it. What are your thoughts, Nathan Hurst, of our fourth string tight end flipping to offensive line?
Shades of Matt Hoke.
Yeah,
though he went to defensive line, but he still wore 85 the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's impressive that the guy has the frame, and we always knew he had the frame for that. He's a really big dude. To put on that much weight, though, to feel confident enough to switch,
in 1 year.
In 1 year, pretty crazy. And maybe he went through a growth spurt in his freshman year, or who knows what. But it's interesting to say the least. I'm not sure it necessarily makes it more likely that he gets on the field sooner rather than later, switching to offensive line, because that's an entirely new position to have to learn, on top of continuing to develop your body to get to the point where you can, hold up against SEC defensive tackles. Mm-hmm. So it makes more sense that they brought in a tight end in the transfer portal, knowing that now. Yep. It was a little odd that they chose to bring him in, and that I'm completely losing my his name from Colorado State. Vince Brown. Makes a lot more sense they brought in Mr. Brown because he will now be the third tight end on the roster, which we knew he'd probably slot in there between second and third string tight end, and that's kind of all they've got. So at least all that they've got that they can really expect to play next year. So that makes a lot more sense. Hopefully this serves Whit well, making the switch. He redshirted last year, so he still has 4 years to get to figure out, develop, and get on the field. We'll see. I would be shocked if we saw him this next year on the field. Shocked. If we did, honestly, it's probably being very bad things, because the attrition due to injury would probably be pretty bad. But who knows? 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we may have a Mr. Hafer I'd imagine a tackle. I don't think he would be a guard with how tall he is, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, 6'6", 275. That is, if this was 10 years ago, that would be perfectly sized tackle. Now you're kind of on the underweight side, but certainly the height is there. Yeah, I was like you. Like, why did we bring in another tight end? because we had not only Jude James, who redshirted, and Dakota Terrell, who will be incoming and probably redshirting, but then you had Whit Hafer. And so now you're like, okay, yeah, so you're moving him to offensive line. But let's run through the tackle depth chart real quick. You have transfer Keegan Trost from many schools, Wake Forest being the last. You have Caleb Pyfrom, who redshirted last year. You have Johnny Williams IV, who you transferred in from West Virginia. You have Jamin Richardson, the JUCO guy, who is, played a little bit last year, 55 snaps over 4 games. You have Brandon Solis, who will be in his 3rd year. And that's not even counting, like a Jack Lane or, Henry Fanuku if he gets wild and decides to play early, which I'm not saying he does. But, you've got a lot of options. And so this seems more like a, let's just fill out the depth chart with a guy who's big enough to do it, instead of going into the portal for yet another one. And, it's fine. It's a long-term play. And if Whit wants to play there, or he thinks that's his best path to play, or that's what the coaching staff is telling him, it's good. But yeah, I wouldn't expect him to see it any faster than if he was a tight end.
Right.
And I do hope he continues to wear 85, because that would be rad.
For sure. I mean, he wouldn't have to report as eligible if he comes in as a 6th lineman. You might try to do some sneaky stuff, though it's kind of hard to hide when your number is 85. I think that automatically highlights you as someone that can catch the ball, even if you are technically a tackle. It's possible that he spent a year in the program and realized, or the coaches realized, he just doesn't have the requisite athleticism that is required in a modern day tight end.
Mm-hmm.
Which in modern football, it requires quite a ridiculous amount of athleticism at a very large size to be able to play that position. So maybe he's more of the big hog molly type and just eat a lot of sandwiches in the next couple of years to get to the point where he can push tackles around as opposed to defensive ends or linebackers.
Yeah, I remember seeing a TikTok from I believe it was a Wake Forest, or maybe like a Pitt offensive lineman, one of those ACC schools, when he was showing like what he ate during the day. That dude ate like 6 Uncrustables in a given day, plus like a whole chicken, tons of rice, like just porking it down, man. Like
that's just for breakfast. What's for lunch?
Yeah, I know, and I'm just like food is good. I like it. Obviously, I'm not a D1 athlete, so I'm not exerting that kind of energy, but like, made me tired just watching him eat that stuff. Like, I'm getting gassed watching someone else eat, let alone doing it myself. Max Copeland, the walk-on from Montana, my favorite Missouri player of all time, famously talked about how he had to wake up at like 2 a.m. and eat an entire chicken just to maintain a 295 weight to play offensive guard in the SEC in 2013. Like, it's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. But these are the things that these guys have to go through. And if Whit's doing it naturally, or like he's just bulking up and they think he can do it, like, that's great. I'm all about it. But Uncrustables, man, I'd never look at them the same way anymore. I'm just like,
those things are like 1,000 calories a pop too. They are not healthy.
Yeah, they are. Very delicious,
yes.
Not healthy. So yeah, there's your breaking news. That's really the only news item. You are in a recruiting period that's pretty quiet. Yes, visits are getting set up for the spring. Yes, you got junior days that are coming up. Yes, you have a spring game that's coming up. Yes, things are in the works, but it's kind of a dead period. This is the time when basketball shines, and we're going to let them shine. But, we can still look at the program at a whole. We can still talk about it, even if there isn't any news. And that's what Nathan Hurst has been doing. He's been going through and giving the coaches a report card, grading their efforts for this past season. Last show we did the defense. This show we're going to do the offense, and maybe a little bit of Eli Drinkwitz and taking it from there. So you wanted to start with Kirby Moore, who, here's your news item. Here's another news item, is currently the offensive coordinator for Missouri football, but his brother just took the New Orleans Saints job. And there's a lot of hullabaloo about young Kirby, going to join his brother in Nolens. I am not an insider, not reporting anything. Just prepare yourselves for that potential possibility. Now, it's been a couple of days and it's been pretty quiet, but that's just something to monitor. So while he's still here, Nathan Hurst, please tell us, what did you think of Kirby Moore's effort in 2024?
Sure. So first, Kellen Moore, his brother, has hired an offensive coordinator, and it's not Kirby Moore. It's Doug Musmeyer, who was the quarterbacks coach at the Eagles with Kellen. So I think that makes it a little more likely that Kirby comes back next year. Because that said, I mean, he could take a quarterback's coaching job in the NFL, I suppose. Certainly could do that. That said, I would be more surprised if he left at this point than if he didn't. You never know. You never know. So we will see. That said, looking kind of more retrospectively on Kirby Moore's season in 2024, because that's really what these grades are for, not his holistic time at Mizzou, but this past season. And since he's only spent 2 seasons at Mizzou, I really only had 2 years to compare. So I looked at 2023. What did his offense do from 2023 to 2024? And it's no secret, we've talked about it for the last 6 months. The offense took a step back in his second year. So why did it do that? I think there's a lot of different reasons. Are they all Kirby Moore's fault? No, probably not. But I broke his report card up into 3, just like the defensive coordinator. I broke it up into running game, passing game, total offense. So running game, loses Cody Schrader, loses 2 very experienced, very good offensive linemen. You expected that running game to take a step back, and it did, but it did not take a very significant step back. In fact, this is, if I'm going to give Kirby Moore a thumbs up in any part of the job that he did this year, it was maintaining a relatively status quo running game after losing the guy who finished 8th in the Heisman voting and most rushing yards in a single season at Mizzou, set that record. Mizzou averaged 168 yards per game on the ground in 23, and 24, 163 yards. So almost the same, 5 yards of difference, very negligible there. They did rush for fewer yards per rush at 4.1 yards per rush versus 4.4 last year. But still not outrageously low, depending on, or considering who they lost. He did a great job, I thought, of weaving in 2 and later in the season 3 guys in Jamal Roberts as well, along with Carroll and Noel, to make a 2.5 headed running back monster to replace the one incomparable Cody Schrader. Ended up being fine on the ground. I thought this was a fine rushing team. Was it an elite rushing team? No. I think they ranked 24th nationally in rushes per game, 59th in yards per game, so kind of middle of the pack. So they were okay, par for the course, nothing outstanding. Also, nothing new or interesting. They ran the same outside zone that Eli Drinkwitz has always run and will presumably will always run. They did mix in some kind of duo runs up the middle too, which to actually pretty good effect, and I'm hoping they can keep that next year as well. But I'm going to give him B+ on the ground. All right, status quo, nothing great. Met expectations. Didn't take a big step back based on how many people they lost. But that moves us to the passing game. Now, this is where we saw the biggest decline.
Hold on, I want to talk about the rushing.
Sure.
So yeah, it wasn't extremely noticeable from like looking at it from the fans' perspective, or really even just probably from the team. It probably felt very similar. You're right. The schemes were mostly the same. You had different guys who could basically replicate what Cody Schrader was doing, but you did see noticeable drop off. It starts with the success rate, because like 48.4% was the rushing success rate for this year. And that's great. That is literally top 20 in the nation. That is very, very good. But compared to what they did in 2023, where they're at 54% or fifth in success rate. Like 54% of the time, you're getting the yards you need when you ran the ball in 23, and you only got 48%. Now that's not a whole lot of plays per game, but it adds up over the year. Now, when you're thinking about like explosive plays, even the 2023 team was not an explosive rushing team. Same for this one, especially this explosive plays just did not exist for this team, even if it was on the ground, which was their strength. But if you're thinking about things from like what they can control or how things go, opportunity rate, how many of your rushes get at least 4 yards? It was 52% in 2023, right? It was 50%. 50% in 2024, which again, all very good, but worse, right? Like that's
right.
Good, but worse. And so you can't help but like go, oh, okay. So like, it's hard to complain. And I think this is kind of what you're like. It's hard to complain about it, but you knew it was worse. And maybe it is losing Cody Schrader or like those two specific linemen, but or like and replacing with guys who hadn't been in the program. But it's just like, I can't complain because it'll still top 20, but it wasn't top 10. And like, you notice it.
Yeah, it wasn't elite. I mean, and if it had been elite, he would have gotten an A or A. Like last year, I would have given him an A or an A plus for his running game. I attribute almost that those differences, the success rate difference, the yards per rush difference, the opportunity rate difference. I attribute that specifically almost entirely to Cody Schrader because that guy literally never lost yards.
Yeah,
never, not once. And so, as good as Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll were, and they had some great games, 1 out of every 6 or 7 runs, they would get stuffed for no gain or lose a yard or 2. And that's, any running back, if your name's not Cody Schrader, you're going to do that. Cody Schrader never did that. And so that, and never losing yards is automatically going to set you up for a better, yards per rush, better success rate, because you are making it that much easier on yourself, let alone if every 5 times you're tackled for a 2-yard loss, that's just going to, over the course of a season, that's going to set those numbers back. And so was Kirby's stats padded by Cody last year quite a bit? I think so.
Yeah. And okay. He did that for Cody. Like that was part of it too. He was responsible for coaching those players and getting them to execute. So like he gets credit for that. And it's tough to get a 1-year rental, right? Because like you look at Eli Drinkwitz's running backs, and other than Larry Roundtree, who was great all 4 years, a Drinkwitz running back takes off in his 2nd year. That's what happened to Tyler Beatty. That's what happened to Cody Schrader. And it was always going to be Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. We're not going to have that 2nd-year leap. So we really weren't going to get to see that. I feel the same way about Ahmad Hardy. Like, sky's the limit for the young kid. I don't think we're going to see it next year. Just the jump up in difficulty, plus the fact that it's a new team, plus the fact that it's a new scheme, no matter how similar it was to what Monroe was running. Like, transfers in year 1, there's just a little bit of a dip before they take off in year 2. So I would expect Jamal Roberts to have a great year, but I do not expect that from Hardy. And so same thing, like Noel and Carroll, I don't think it's any fault of their own. I think they did really well given the circumstances, that it really wasn't that much of a drop off for 2 1-year rental guys who were not there, but like it was there. So, I give credit to Moore for getting the most out of them. Especially considering the quick turnaround, but yeah, it was just less. That's all.
The one thing that is hard to parse out, though, and this isn't necessarily positive or negative for Kirby, but it's hard to parse out his running game versus Eli Drinkwitz's running game because it's virtually identical from what we saw the first 3 years of Eli Drinkwitz at Mizzou before hiring Kirby in 2023. They run the same schemes, maybe Kirby decides when to run versus when to pass, but the actual, the plays that are run on the field, the execution, very similar. So, I don't know if you give him credit for that or not. I would just take that away, but so the running game is, I wouldn't really chalk that up as a positive or a negative for him too much one way or another. It kind of is what it is. And I think it was kind of decreed upon high that this is how we're going to run our running game. That's probably why Kirby was hired in the first place, is because he was on board with that and there. So that takes us to the passing game. This is where, I think we'll at least I leaned a little more on Kirby in the passing game versus the running game. And this is also where we saw the much more significant step back from 23 to 24, despite really not losing anybody important. In fact, keeping everybody important, with the exception of Javon Foster at left tackle. But even doing that, the sack rate, the pressure rate was not significantly worse. It was slightly worse, but not significantly worse to see the downturn in stats. I mean, yards per game, 265 in 23, 218 in 24. Completion percentage down 5%. Now, some of that might be Drew Pine in a couple of his games where he had pretty low passing percentage, but over the course of a season, down 5%. It's not great. 65% in 23, 60% in 24. Yards per pass attempt. This one took a big dip. 9.1 yards per pass attempt in 23, 7.2 in 24. So when they're anytime they throw the ball, it is a closer, shorter pass. And then when they completed a pass, so yards per completion, 14 yards per completion in 23, only not even 12 yards per completion, 11.9 in 2024. So less efficient. They didn't gain very many yards, and they did complete passes. They just weren't pushing the ball down the field at all. I'm sure you probably have some success rate stats that I don't have in front of me right now, but those are way worse too. I guarantee you that they were. So big regression there, despite having a fifth-year senior quarterback, despite having all of your wide receivers back, including a first round draft pick and then another draft pick in Theo Weiss. Very, very disappointing. And blame wise, I mean, I think you got to look at Kirby a lot there. Did Brady Cook regress himself? I think he might have had some regression, and maybe a big part of that's injuries.
Yep.
Did the wide receivers regress? Hard to say. Hard to point out. I think Theo Weiss certainly didn't regress. He had a great season. Luther Burden's stats were half of what they were in 23 almost. So was that on him playing worse, or was that on the scheme, or was that on Brady Cook not getting the ball? Hard from the outside looking in to tell that, but not great. So my grade there was C+. The only reason it was a C+ is because they went 10-3, and so he gets a C+. Otherwise, it probably would have been worse than that, to be honest.
Man, I would have given him a D even if they did win 10 games. But that's me. I'm kind of a jerk. Passing success rate 2023, 48.4%. That's 13th in the country. Passing success rate in 2024, 40.7, which is 79th. That is an 8% drop off. Noticeable. You mentioned the yards per dropback, which is very good. How about this? Percentage of completions of 20 plus yards. Percentage of completions that go for 20 plus yards. Well, if you look at the 2023 team, you would be looking at 21.8%, which was 21st in the country. If you look at the 2024 team, it's 14.8%, which is 94th. It's not good. I mean, you can look at anything here and it's worse. Well, take that back. The interception percentage was much better. 1.9% in 2023, which was 22nd, and then 1.2% in 2024, which was second in the country. Wow. Second. Holy cow. That's great. But yeah, that's just, it didn't work. It didn't work. And I don't know if that's because Marquise Johnson was literally the speedy glue that held everything together, and he missed like the entire year basically and played injured, or if just, sometimes guys get worse. And I don't know which ones it was, but it wasn't good.
There was one thing to be fair too. I think there was, and maybe it was due to the fact that they realized early on that this was not going to be an explosive offense for whatever reason. There was a clear shift in how the strategy, I think, and Drinkwitz has always had teams that have been ball control, conservative, slow, but that was on hyperdrive this year. This team won games because they controlled the clock, they controlled the ball, they limited possessions, and for whatever reason, they decided they were going to lean into that even more this year. And I don't know if that's because they knew they couldn't be efficient and effective throwing the ball well, or was that a side effect of them taking this different approach? Brady Cook threw 2 interceptions all year. One of them was like a throwaway on 4th down against Buffalo that doesn't even count. And then the other one was like a tipped pass, or so. I'm not even remembering the other one. Anyway, that's crazy to go an entire football season and only throw 2 interceptions. So they've highly valued protecting the ball, don't take chances. And that may have been a big reason why this, a lot of these stats took a big turn downwards. Still, you would hope that they would, even if you limit the number of times you're throwing the ball downfield, you would hope the short passes were efficient, and even those were not particularly efficient.
No, they were not. The success rate was not there. The efficiency was not there. It's just, and I don't think that you look at this group of returning receivers that we had heading into 24 and say, Now's a good time to crank it down. Let's do this in the last year of Theo Weiss and Luther Burden. Let's really embrace ground and pound clock control. This is the time to do that. I don't think it is. Unless to your point, they're like, oh, Brady is not healing correctly. He cannot throw it like he used to.
And
Uh-oh.
Marquise can't beat
Yeah.
top because he's either out of the game or just limited.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know.
But again, the other side has scholarship players too. Maybe they just figured it out. That could be it too. I'm not saying that you figure out speed, but I'm just saying if you figure out what Luther likes and you can run coverage that's going to eliminate that, and you force Brady to make read 2 or 3, which he's a good college quarterback, but making quarterbacks continuously make their second or third reads, especially for a guy who likes to run like Brady, like that puts him out of his comfort zone. That could easily be it too. But Luther did not have the targets, nor the catches, nor the yards, or the touchdowns that he had, like you said, and whatever factors played into it meant that the passing game was not very good. And
Right.
that's not a comparison to last. That's literally just not very good. One of the worst passing offenses in the country, just flat out.
It was, and that brings us to total offense. So kind of how do the running game, the passing game work together? How did Kirby Moore put them together to form an overall total offense? So obviously the total offense was down, yards per game was down close to 50 yards per game from 2023. Actually, more than 50 yards per game in 2023, 433 to 381, down a full yard per play, which is a lot, from 6.3 yards per play to 5.3. Points per game down 5 points a game. Points per play down by almost a full tenth of a point per play. 0.64. So that's how many points you average scoring per play that you run. Red zone scoring attempts were down 3.9 and 23 to 3.3. So almost half of a red zone attempt per game. The one area that they improved, and I touched on this already a little bit, time of possession. So they really leaned into time of possession, ball control this year. And I think part of that is a credit to Corey Batoon and his unit's ability to get off the field, as we talked about last time. Elite third down defense getting off the field. But Mizzou was 8th in the country this year in time of possession. They controlled the clock 32 minutes and 52 seconds out of the 60 minutes available. That was 8th in the country. So that was really good. They leaned into it and they were successful in doing so.
Also, let's not overlook the Missouri offense was 16th in third down success rate. So like the defense was elite at third downs and the offense was elite at third downs, which leads you to incredible ball control.
Exactly. So that was my very next thing to talk about, third downs. Mizzou converted third downs at a 45% clip, which was 22nd in the country. So even though their success rate was even better than that, but 45% of the time they got to a third down, they can convert it. So that, on top of the fact that the defense was getting off the field on third down, Mizzou was keeping the ball on third down and getting first downs. That's what allowed this style of play to be effective enough to win 10 games this season. So all in all, disappointing. I would have to say Kirby's overall thing was disappointing. Step back. I probably would have given him an A- after 2023 if I had graded him then. But I gave him a B-. This was a couple weeks ago for 2024, his performance in 2024. As with his passing game grade of C+, he found a way to win 10 games. And at Mizzou, when you win 10 games, you're gonna get a passing grade from me. Now, I hope 5 years from now, Mizzou wins 10 games enough that just winning 10 games doesn't earn a B-. But I gave him a B- because Mizzou has only won 10 games 10 times. So he's good and figuring out a way, despite the deficiencies of this offense, figuring out a way and a strategy to lean into enough to win games. I'll give him some credit for that. So B- on 2024, not calling for him to be fired by any means. He does have a big job ahead of him next year, though, breaking in a new quarterback, no matter who that is. Breaking in at this point fairly inexperienced wide receiver core. 3 new offensive linemen. It's got to be there's a lot of turnover. So we will be. I will be very interested to see what this offense looks like next year. And I think honestly, we're probably looking at if they could be this good next year as they were in 2024, that will be a win for this coaching staff.
Well, I was going to say, like, if you think about how college football used to be, where like 2023 was like the 2007, and then 2024 was like the 2008, right? Where you returned a bunch of people and you had expectations. And so, the Gary Pinkel model of you build, you crest, then you rebuild, and you crest again. I'm trying to figure out, like, if, was this overshooting? Like, was it, given what they lost and what they returned, was this underperforming or was it overperforming? And I'm not given the exact pieces they lost and the way they like to play. I don't know.
Do you mean did they overperform in 23 as opposed to underperform in 24?
No, like in 24, like you return your quarterback and your receivers. Yes, okay, you expectations are high, but this is still at its core an offense that likes to run the ball and is replacing 2 key offensive linemen and like one of the better running backs in program history. Is the fact that they won 10 games with this offense and this group of guys did they overshoot what they should have been because even with all the receivers, they are a running team at heart, or is it underperforming because they had all this returning production and like they barely scored 20 points a game?
I think it's underperforming with the talent because they're a running team at heart. Yes, but I think a big part of coaching, and this isn't just Kirby's job, but Eli Drinkwitz's as well, is adapting to who you have on your roster. And sure. They didn't necessarily lean into that, I think, enough. Or at least effectively. So I would say, based on who they had on the roster and the talent that we will see here in 6 weeks when the NFL draft comes around, they're going to have a tackle drafted in the first round. They're going to have a wide receiver drafted in the first round. They're going to have another wide receiver drafted at probably day 2 or early day 3. I would imagine at least one Marcus Bryant or Cameron Johnson will get, if not drafted, they'll both certainly be signed as free agents after the draft. So this team had talent, and Nate Noel may sign with the team after the draft as well. Brady Cook will find himself on a roster in August. I don't know, after that what that'll look like, but he will get a look at in camp by some NFL team, whether he gets drafted or not. So this was an underperforming team. Looking at the overall rankings. Middle of the pack at best in a lot of these. This team had way more talent than middle of the pack offense.
Fair enough. Well, let's look at the coaches then. Obviously, they're not the coordinator, but they have more direct control over their positions than the coordinator does. So, kind of looking at this, I think you broke it down running versus passing. I want to start with Brandon Jones, offensive line. What did you think of his effort last year?
Yeah, so I thought he did bring in, we talked about losing Foster and Delgado, but he had his entire right side returning, including center Connor Tollison. Brought in some very talented players to replace the guys that they lost. But as we're learning, not just at Mizzou, but across the country, bringing in offensive linemen from the portal, no matter how talented they are, it takes a while to click. And I think we saw that quite a bit this season as well. That doesn't mean that those guys, primarily Caden Green, won't be excellent this next year, but it just took a while to get that unit to gel. Ultimately, the offensive line ended up being fine. I did not think that they were the key problem for any of Mizzou's offensive woes this year. They run blocked pretty well, I thought. Pass blocking slightly worse than the year before, but nothing significant. They gave up 2.2 sacks per game as opposed to two sacks per game. So, 2 more sacks in the season basically is what that equals out to. Maybe 3. Very, very little difference there. I don't know. That said, it just felt the unit took a while to gel. So I gave him a B. Thinking back on, I might have given a B plus if I were to redo this again. But he did, because I don't think I really factored in the fact that he lost Connor Tollison and was able to do some great work. And Drake Heismayer gets the vast majority of the props here. But Brandon Jones did, develop Heismeyer to the point where he was able to fill in at center, which is probably the most difficult spot to replace on the line, and he did so admirably. And Brandon Jones did make that happen. So I gave him a B. Talking it out loud, I think I might bump him up to a B plus. The offensive line was fine. They're going to have a lot of work done next year, as we talked about. They're losing 3 of their 5 starters, and Connor Tollison is coming off of a knee injury that, who knows what his recovery timeline looks like there. Hopefully he'll be ready to go by August, but we don't know.
Yeah. This is interesting. I'm looking at the pass blocking stats. Do you know how many sacks Javon Foster gave up in his last year?
I think if he gave up any, it was like 1.
Apparently he gave up 5.
Really? Maybe I'm thinking of his junior year where he had insane.
Could be. Yeah.
Insane rate.
He had a 2.1% pressure rate allowed, 5 sacks attributed to him. Because then I was comparing him to Marcus Bryant. I'm like, well, clearly that's got to be better, right? Like he's going to be better than Bryant. And yeah, Marcus Bryant had a 2.8% pressure rate, which is 0.7 more, with 4 sacks. So I would say, probably about the same left tackle position from a passing standpoint that you had the previous year. Connor Tollison's pressure rate in 23 was 1.9. His pressure rate in 24 was 1.3. Okay, so he got better. Xavier Delgado, your left guard, was at a 2.8% pressure rate. This year's left guard was Caden Green. He had, good God, 0.8. That's a huge improvement. Armand Mimbu, 2.2% pressure rate, 23, 1.8 in 24. And then, Cameron Johnson, 1.8 in 24, and he was at 2.9. So literally, like, each position got better as far as pass protection goes. Gave up fewer sacks than they did the year prior. The run blocking numbers aren't as great, which I think we can all kind of figure that out. And that's another thing that kind of got a little bit stinkier, but not noticeably. In fact, most of them, the guys who returned, got better at run blocking. So it's weird. It felt like the offensive line was worse. And I think maybe they just didn't play as well together because they didn't have all those years of gelling like you talked about. That might have just been it. But on the individual level, they were each pretty good. You just didn't have a quarterback who could take advantage of it, or, you're kind of subbing out running backs who maybe, weren't used to certain situations. I don't know. I know we're trying to figure out what's going on, but there's just so many moving pieces. It's tough to tell, but at least on an individual basis, Brandon Jones' guys got better as individuals. There's just the unit, not as good.
Yeah. And I think we could, once again, something we can lay at the feet of Cody Schrader. Most of the time, 95% of the time, offensive linemen make their running backs look really good.
Yeah.
In the case of a guy like Cody Schrader, I think he did a lot of heavy lifting that made his offensive line look really good. Just in terms of his vision, his ability to find holes where most normal running backs would not be able to find a hole. And maybe those holes were there this year. And the running backs just didn't find them as much. But I think Schrader made that unit look even better. That they already were a good unit. Made them look even better because once again, he never took a loss. So if you have a Nate Noel who takes a 2-yard loss, then you're going to go, come on, offensive line, what are you doing? Yeah. When Cody Schrader in that exact same situation would have found some way to at least get back to the line of scrimmage, if not, gain a yard, because he was a magic, little elf man that could hop, somehow slip through and not take a loss. Mm-hmm. And so that just gives you at least a better taste in your mouth from an off, thinking about, qualitatively how this offensive line played, and maybe that didn't really bear itself out.
Yeah, could be. Well, we talked about the running backs. Obviously, Curtis Looper, I think, is probably the best position coach on the team. He certainly had the position that's been the bedrock of Eli Drinkwitz's offenses, and he's put 3 guys into the league, potentially more after this year. So I'm curious, how did you feel like Looper did replacing Schrader with Noel, Carroll, and Roberts?
No, I think he far and away is the best position coach, and at least this year, given the fact that we had to replace Cody Schrader, and he found a way to piece together 3 and some cases 4 guys when you talk about Kejuan Lacey, and he found a really effective rotation, figured out their strengths of, who's good at what, figured out that Jamal Roberts, great third down back, good pass blocker, ended up by the end of the year being kind of more of the short yardage back in some cases even than Marcus Carroll did. So I think he is really good at figuring out what the strengths of his guys are and putting them in the situations that they will succeed, and then communicating, I think, with the offensive coordinator to say, hey, this guy can do this guy can do this, or this guy's on a hot streak. We got Nate Noel running wild over South Carolina. Let's leave him in and let him go and keep running the ball. I think he did great. I gave him an A-. Probably could have given him an even A just because of the job of piecing together a run game to one that we talked about. It wasn't as good, but close enough to being as good as 2023 that it was, good, because it was a fine running game. And a big part of that was finding these disparate pieces and putting them all together. So great job by Curtis.
As always, he's doing great. So then you get to the passing side, and obviously we're going to get some stinky grades here. I'm not sure how many people know the current quarterback's coach. His name is Sean Gleason. I like Sean Gleason a lot. I've liked him since 2013. He was, 2017, I should say, when he was Princeton's offensive coordinator and ran some really funky stuff. That was super cool. So cool that Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State wanted him, brought him in 2019. They had a great offense then, and then Rutgers pushed him away, and then he got stinky Rutgers all over himself, and then he went to the analyst route. But I like the Sean Gleason hire because I think he's a really smart offensive mind. But the 1 year he's at Missouri, he's the quarterback's coach with Brady Cook and Drew Pine. So how did he do?
Not great. Now, I am going to say that, to be completely fair to him, we just don't have a large sample size with him. No. He was hired as an analyst, an offensive analyst. He was not hired as the quarterback's coach. But like a few other guys on the position coach staff, they were elevated once the NCAA changed the rules back last summer, which allowed more on-field coaches. So last year, Kirby Moore was the quarterback's coach on top of being the offensive coordinator. This year, because Mizzou was able to have more coaches, they elevated Sean Gleason, as you mentioned, a former offensive coordinator at several spots. So it kind of made sense. Hey, we got this offensive coordinator, but he had almost no quarterback coaching experience before that. He was, I think he had 1 or 2 years, but that was not kind of how he cut his teeth as a position coach before he eventually was elevated to the offensive coordinating position in the Ivy League and then at Oklahoma State. So, small sample size. However, in that sample size, his one guy, Brady Cook, was significantly worse. Now, hard to say what the reason was. Was that entirely due to injuries, which Brady Cook had multiple all season long? What did it have anything to do with coaching, or how Gleason was helping Brady prep for games? Really hard to tell. But all we can see is that Brady Cook's performance drastically declined in the year that Sean Gleason was a coach. I will give him some credit, though. He was able to get Drew Pine to a point where he won a game against Oklahoma, against a very good Oklahoma defense.
Yep.
Now, it was not pretty to watch. It was kind of felt like pulling teeth the entire time, but they went into halftime, said some stuff, don't know what, came back out in the second half against that game, and Drew Pine found a way to win the game. So I will give him some credit for that. I don't know, how much he should get versus, and also how much blame he should get for the overall decline of the offense. But I'm going to give him a C+. Feels more like an incomplete just because I don't like giving grades when I don't have a large sample size to go off of. But C+. He's going to have his job cut out for him next year. Entirely new unproven quarterback, no matter who ends up being the starter. And I think this will be kind of his make or break season at Mizzou, depending on how the quarterback position goes. I mean, if we have another poor performance from across the board next year, he may not be around. I'm not trying to fire him, but it wasn't great this year. I'll say that.
I got some trivia for you. So Sean Gleason went to Williams College. That's not the trivia. This is because this is in the unique mascot Hall of Fame. Do you know what the Williams athletic teams are referred to from a mascot standpoint?
Oh man, is this like D3 or NAIA?
What does Williams play? I think they are Division 3. Division 3.
I have absolutely no clue.
You will never guess it. I'm just wondering if you recognized William from like those random weird mascot
I
stories.
don't like. I mean, I know it's not like for some reason wants me to say that they had like they're similar to like Centenary, which are the gentlemen and the ladies. But I'm sure I'm off. I'm sure I'm off there.
Yeah. So Williams athletic teams are the Fs.
Like the letter F.
No. EPHS. The
EP.
Fs.
Okay. Okay. What
The
is an F?
F. So an F, because I remember looking this up. An F is a student at Williams College, which feels like
It's very circular.
It's too circular. So you're like, well, what? How the hell do we get here? So the college's founder is Ephraim Williams.
Oh, okay.
EPHRAIM.
Okay, got
So F, or maybe it's EF. I don't know, but it's EPH. The Williams EFs or Fs.
Well, I'm now a better person for having known that.
Here's the bonus round. What animal is representing the Williams mascot? Take a wild guess. It's on a farm. That's my hint.
Is it a mule?
It's a cow. It's a big old purple and gold cow.
Not even a bull or a longhorn or a steer.
Oh no, a moo cow, one that you milk. That is their mascot. That's
well,
God
hopefully Sean Gleason can bring some of that F magic to the quarterbacks next year.
All right, so we got through the quarterbacks. Let's talk about the receivers. You're going to be talking about my second favorite coach on this staff, whose Chargers did not have a very good year. On the field stuff, what did you think of Jacob Peeler?
So I actually gave Peeler a pretty high grade, and that's entirely because of his other job, which is recruiting coordinator. I gave him an A minus. I'll
oh my God, you gave him an A minus.
I'm in.
Oh,
and this was a couple weeks ago when I wrote this. Bear in mind, I in talking out more here today, and then also the last time that we had we talked about the defensive staff. I think I would adjust this in retrospect down probably to a B, an even B, because of the on-field step back that most of the receivers saw. The reason I kind of rated him higher earlier, though, beyond the fact that he's an awesome recruiting coordinator, is that short of Burden, there were like I thought that there were reasons why the other receivers may not have played well. Marquise Johnson hurt all season. Finally was healthy at the end of the year, had an outstanding game against Iowa. Almost to the point where I'm actually very excited about his future, what he showed, his ability to run, not just throw it deep to Grissom or to Marquise Johnson, but he ran the full route tree and was getting open on just about everything. So I can't count that against Peeler that Johnson was hurt all year, and when he finally does play, plays great. I thought Theo Weiss had a good year, had a better year the year before. Kind of was the lead dog in that whole position group. So I have to give Peeler props for developing Theo out to being a really good receiver. We saw Josh Manning, probably didn't get used as much as I hope he did, but he saw some progression. We saw him kind of get better and develop.
Not just run, motion before the snap. He actually got to play a little bit. Yeah.
Right. So he's another guy that I'm excited to see, next year what they're able to do with him as well. So beyond that, I mean, Luther's the one guy that took a step back, and I mean, it's hard to say why. I think a big part of it is the type of offense. The offense. I think the defense has started keying in on him even more than they had in the past. It took away a lot of the things that Kirby liked to do with him, and I think a lot of that falls on Kirby's inability to scheme up ways to get him open. So like it was the passing game was worse, but I can't put that too much on the fact that the receivers themselves played significantly worse or they weren't dropping passes. I mean, what can receivers control? They can control the routes that they run.
Yeah.
And they can control when the ball's thrown to them, whether or not they catch it. This was a very good catching team. They caught the ball when it was thrown to them.
Yeah.
On the whole, I mean, did they have a drop here or there? Sure. But I mean, you're never going to catch every single pass. But on the whole, this was a good catching team. I didn't think it was I thought it was an overall a fine route running team. I think that the problem with the receivers not getting open was more based on the scheme and or the inability of whatever quarterback is throwing them the ball to find them and get them the ball accurately and in rhythm and in time. So now I've talked myself back up. I think I'm going to give him a B plus.
Well, I mean, you also got to remember
we
they
went on a
lost.
journey.
Yeah, I mean, they also lost Mookie Cooper halfway through the year.
Yeah, he was hurt, and that's he was never going to put up massive numbers, but that's a piece on this team,
Yeah,
experience piece, and he's reliable. He would catch the ball when it's thrown to him, and so lost him for a whole half of the season. So
yeah,
it's going on a journey. We're going to go B plus for Jacob Bueller.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Theo Weiss had a 5% drop rate. That's not great, but not bad. Luther Burden 1.2% drop rate. Brett Norfleet 2.6. Marquise Johnson 5.6, but again, he was going deep for most of those. Your big issue is actually Mookie Cooper with a 10% drop rate. Josh Manning 0. Nate Noel 0. Mekhi Miller, I don't blame him for transferring. He had a terrible year. Brady Cook could not hit him. He had a 21.4% catch rate with only a 7.1% drop rate. Like the balls thrown his way were not good. Same for Daniel Blood, 7.7% drop rate, a little bit better on the catch rate with 61%. But then, Marcus Carroll, running back, and then Jordan Harris had some thumbs for fingers, but he's a tight end. So I do agree. The catch rates were really good. They're kind of middle to pack are good across the board. It's just, for whatever reason, the routes or the timing or whatever was just off. It was just off, and not having Marquise Johnson for the first half of the year, not having Mookie Cooper for the second half of the year, Mekhi Miller just not an option, just cursed. And I totally don't blame him for transferring. He needed a fresh start. It's just some of the parts were not there, and the effectiveness was not there. And you go back to 2023, and that's not the case. The yards per target were great, the catch rate was great. Everyone's over 70%. Timing was there, the catching was there. It's just timing was off this year. That's kind of how it goes.
Yeah. And so that takes us to our last position, which I found of all of these the hardest to evaluate, and that's Durham Cato, tight end position. This Drinkwitz has always used his tight ends in the strangest and just weird, or just doesn't use them and then uses them in weird ways, and just not unconventional. Well, we'll settle on unconventional tight end usage.
Yeah.
And so really hard, especially the fact that his best tight end, his first string tight end, Brett Norfleet, was injured all year. Mm-hmm. And even when he did play, was clearly not 100%. Really hard to evaluate him. Jordan Harris, good run blocker, as you mentioned, has thumbs for hands. So had 5 catches and probably 5 drops as well.
Pretty much, yeah.
And then beyond that, we had Tyler Stevens, who almost barely ever played after playing quite a bit in earlier seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And and then the guy after that, Jude James, I guess, redshirted. Whit Hafer is now an offensive lineman. So very little to work with, considering Norfleet was injured and just not healthy all year. And Harris is clearly a kind of one-dimensional guy. So really hard to evaluate. I gave him a B, because that B's get degrees. And so, there we go. Well, maybe we'll see something more to go on next year.
Yeah, B's are beautiful. That's what my AP Lit teacher told me all the time. B's are beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it's first year, injured one player. It's kind of like Sean Gleason and the quarterbacks. Really, what can you glean from this? What do you learn from the guy who stepped in and inherited Brady Cook and really had to coach Drew Pine for one game like that? What do you take away from that when you're kind of like a single person position? So I'm with you on that, but obviously we want to see more as we go through it, and obviously a healthy Brett Norfleet's going to help with that. So, good, very good. We'll get to Eli Drinkwitz and program management probably the next show, because guess what? There's not going to be a whole lot that's going on in the next couple of weeks, or if there is, we'll cover it. But we've knocked out defense, we've knocked out offense, and we'll talk about the program health next show. I don't know. Any parting thoughts? Any last words?
It is the coldest week of the year in Missouri. Times out perfectly with the most boring week regarding Mizzou football. So It's just we're in the depths. But what the positive there is, it only gets brighter from here. The sun will only be up longer. The days will only get warmer. Football will only get closer than it is right now. So, we just bear with us, all of it. We all got to bear with it. That makes football so much more special when we only have it 3 or 4 months out of the year. So we got to survive February 1st, and then March, and then April, and then May, and then June, and then July, and then we'll be there. So we'll get there.
And there'll be news. You open up the transfer portal again after spring, and things move around, and I'm sure there's going to be plenty of other weird things that the NCAA decides to make legal or illegal or whatever expansion. We can talk about all that. So there's plenty of things to talk about. But until then, that is going to be the show for today. As always, we appreciate the downloads and the subscriptions. You can leave a comment or rate us. We love all types of feedback from you all. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at Nate G. Edwards. He's at Burst to Hurst. And of course, you can follow the Rock M flagship at Rock M Nation and our podcasting outlet at Rock M Radio. And of course, if you're on Blue Sky, we're on that app as well. We appreciate you tuning in this time. We'll try to do better next time. And until then, MIZ.
ZOU.